Hello, everyone. I'm about to answer a question, and I thought that it would be better shared as a video because maybe you need to hear this too. Maybe this would also be helpful for you. If we have not met yet, my name is Kira. I created this group to share insights and reflections and guidance from my journey as a struggling teen, and especially my struggles with depression, anxiety, BPD, self-harm, and feeling suicidal. And the question that I am answering today is, how do you help someone who can't be confronted with anything and who does not see or acknowledge their role in a situation? And especially with teenagers, you've probably found with your own child, it is very difficult for them to take accountability. And this can feel like you're coming up against a wall because you've probably realized by now you cannot change for them. You cannot make better decisions on their behalf. You cannot force them to do anything. And so if you cannot get them to realize and appreciate their role in the circumstances of their life and the trajectory of their life, how will anything change? And so what really is going on with a teenager who is not taking accountability and who is, if anything, denying accountability is that they are terrified. They are absolutely terrified. When I think back to my teenage years, the reason that I was not taking accountability was because it was a form of self-protection. And it was a form of self-protection in two senses. The first sense was that it was protecting my identity. Teenagers are in the process of developing their identity. And the more that I had people trying to change who I was and criticize me, the more I felt motivated to distance myself from all of their suggestions. So the more that my parents might encourage me to take accountability, look at what you're doing, change, the more I felt misunderstood because they were not actually seeing how much pain I was in. They were only seeing my behavior and getting upset with me for it, which I understand. It was concerning behavior. It was very difficult. And I didn't know how to articulate to them. I didn't know how to say, Mom, I'm actually deep down in so much pain. I hate myself so much. And I just don't know what to do. I need help. I mean, I would sometimes say that, but I would say it in like a desperate moment. But really, that was what was going on. I was in a lot of pain. And I didn't feel understood. I didn't feel seen. And so I just went further and further into my own world where I was sort of impervious to outside suggestions because I didn't trust people. I didn't trust anyone. So not taking accountability meant that I was protecting myself because I was not allowing anyone else's influence in. Not accountability itself being outside influence, but it was like that was what was kind of being pushed on me a bit. But the second piece, and this is really the more important one because I've talked before about identity in teenagers, is that it sounds so counterintuitive, but I actually did not want to take accountability because I cared what my parents thought about me, which I know seems a little impossible because I was acting out so recklessly. I would say the cruelest things to them. I never wanted to be around them. I tried to leave the house as much as possible, but that did not actually mean anything about how much I cared what they thought about me. I really care what my parents thought about me. And so when they would be upset with me for something, instead of taking accountability, I would just try to argue why I had done what I had done and why it made sense. because in some way I felt like if they understand why I do this and they see that it was actually the most sensible and reasonable thing for me to do, then they're not going to think of me as a failure. They're not going to think of me as a bad kid. They're not going to think of me as broken. Like if I can just explain and defend myself, at some point they'll come around and they'll actually understand me. So my refusal to take accountability was in a way a plea to be understood. And I know that this might shock you and you might think that it's not true, but I promise your teenager cares what you think about them. Even when a teenager is angry and upset, they always care how their parents feel about them. They do. And in some way, it was because I felt like my parents saw so much wrongness in me that I almost wanted to get on top of it. Like, oh, you think I'm a bad kid? Okay, fine. I'll be the worst kid you've ever seen then. Because at least then I'm the one who's in control of this pain. And another piece about this is that, like the accountability, this being self-protection, was that it was so painful for me to actually be in reality and confront my life and see how deeply, deeply sad I was, how alone I felt, how I had thrown away so many opportunities, how I had hurt so many people, how I had disrespected myself. And if I didn't take accountability, I didn't look at that, I could keep running my whole life. I could spend my whole life running away from looking at all of that pain, all of those years of pain. And so a part of me was trying to protect me from how much shame was going to come up from that process. There was a part of me that knew that looking that clearly in the face and admitting to it would mean so much work. It was going to mean reckoning with so much struggle and shame. So that's really what not taking accountability was for me, and I know the same for many of your children. They're trying to feel in control of themselves, and so they're sort of refusing these outside influences to try and bolster that sense of self-concept and identity. And it's a way to actually maybe try and protect themselves from feeling your disappointment, which again, it's counterintuitive because I know my parents would say to me, if you just take accountability, we actually would feel way differently, but that didn't land with me really. It was like I didn't want them to see me as wrong. So I was always trying to kind of reframe and reorganize the story and the events that had happened. So it's a plea to be understood and to try and prevent, my parents seeing me in a bad way. And then as well protecting me from having to reckon with what has happened because of how painful that is. So how then do you get someone to see when if your child is in a similar situation where they are not taking accountability and you feel like they're not in reality and they're not seeing what's going on? You need to have the context that I just gave, because the lack of accountability is a defense mechanism. It's a form of self-protection. So what you do if someone is exhibiting and enacting a self-defense mechanism, you don't come down on them harder because they will just defend themselves even more. They'll just double down on that. You create the conditions where they no longer need that defense mechanism. I remember my third week in wilderness therapy, I think, getting a letter from my mom. And at the end of the letter, my mom wrote, we would always say, one of our little phrases was, I love you to the moon and back. And at the end of the letter, she wrote, I'm getting a little teary-eyed thinking about it, I love you to the moon and back 100 times, and I always will, forever. And when I really felt like my mom will love me no matter what, even if I admit how wrong I've been, even if I take years to figure this out, even if there's more things I have to tell her, she loves me no matter what. I didn't feel the need to hide things as much anymore and to refuse the reality and the truth of situations. Because really, the not taking accountability was like the fear that I was not going to be loved. I'm not going to be loved and I'm not going to be accepted if I actually admit to all of this. And it's not a conscious thought, because when you spell it out and you put it this plainly, it doesn't make logical sense. It's like, we know if you take it, the people love you, take accountability, you know, work on things and everything's going to be fine. But that's not the state that someone is in when they're just this afraid. It's like their instinctual brain is just saying, you have to somehow run away from something that might risk you not being loved. And so right now, in response to this question, your daughter's defenses are activated. As I was saying, people rarely at the very beginning of recovery or in treatment go in day one and say, yes, I need help. Sometimes that happens. I'm not saying it never happens. But usually when teenagers are starting to get support, they're still running this script and they're still in this pattern of, I'm not understood, so I can't, I'm not understood and I'm not seen. So I can't really actually become curious about these things because all I'm focused on is just pushing back against them. No one is taking the time to really get me and understand me. And what I have seen in my years in treatment, observing teenagers around me, and in my years working with teenagers, when someone actually feels seen and understood, the self-defense mechanisms slow down and they soften. And they can actually breathe and become more reflective and curious and introspective about things. But that's not going to happen when someone is afraid of what they might lose if they take accountability. Because accountability basically means admitting. It means like co-signing something and copping to something. And so people are very afraid of what might happen if they get really, really honest. So the way that you get someone to see this when it feels like you can't confront them with anything is you focus on making them feel loved. And you focus on helping them to feel seen. And be curious about how you can understand their experience. Don't get into these power struggles where you're trying to get them to admit to something, because they're just going to push back against that. And with confronting someone with something, it has to come from a place of immense respect for them and love for them. Not because you're disappointed, not because you're angry, not because if you just weren't this way, things would be easier for everyone. It has to come from a place of, I love you, and I know that your life can feel so much richer and healthier and more joyful for you. And so that's why I'm bringing this to you. And people really can feel and sense the difference in that. So it's not about trying to get them to see something, because as long as they're in this state of feeling like, if I take accountability, I risk losing love, it's literally like they've got blinders on. I had blinders on. There were times where I truly was not living in reality when I was in these years. I had taken my my mom's credit card one time, and it fell out of my pants pocket in front of her, and she picked it up and was like, "What is this?" And I was like, I don't know how it got there. I was so dissociated. I was in so much pain. I was not at all, and I'm gonna make another video about lying, but it was like I had blinders on. I just literally could not see what had happened because of how afraid I was. So it's it's a simple concept and it's very challenging for many people to put into practice. So please have grace with yourself. But that really is how things shifted for me, was that I finally felt unconditionally loved enough that I could access the courage and the integrity and resilience to actually look at my life and look at it clearly. So I hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions, please do let me know in the comments. And as well, if you have a teenager who is in a similar place and is struggling with this, what made the absolute biggest difference in my life was when I had someone who was patient enough with me, was patient and compassionate enough with me that my self-defense mechanisms finally softened and I could engage with the process I just described. And that is the work that I do with teenagers. So if you're interested in connecting and discussing that support for your child, please send me a message. Have a great day.